So here we're on Daf Tezvav with base. The Gemara answers, we're going to rewrite the Brisa, and we're going to add a piece into the Brisa. And this is the way we should read the Brisa. And Avtulmus testifies to the name of the five Skedim, Esrog, Achar Lekitosel Maser, Achar Chanotel Shvius. Oh, yes, that was gerecht. Now he's correct. Everything fits into place. So if there was a chanot in shishis, it doesn't have kedusha shvius, and certainly it's potter min abir. So even though the lakita took place in shvius, but this was a case of chanot b'shishis. If on the other hand the chanot was in shvius, then it has kedusha shvius and it's chayiv and biur like any pair of shvius, even though it was niklat b'shminis. But Rabbi Seinu nimdu be'usha, they disagreed, and they say achal l'kitasa bein l'masir bein the shvius. So it comes out now that Rabbi and Rav Himnuna are standing on the shoulders or accepted the sheet of Avtulmos in the name of the five Skedim, and therefore Esrog, if it had a chanot in shvius and the lakita was in shminis, it has the din of perish shvius. It's chayiv and bir potem amaser. Now, what about the case of esrog shechanat b'shishis v'nilkat b'shvius? So certainly, since the chanot took place in shishis and esrog is basa chanot, and therefore doesn't have future shvius, it's potem abir. Now we have an inner machlokas between Rav and Rav Yosef with regard to maser. Rabbah says that since Hakol v'mashmishim bo, everyone's going to start taking your esrog when they flood the field on shvius. Therefore, it's like hefker, you can't protect it. Therefore, it's part of an amas. It's against the will of the Bailim that it became hefker. But Rav Himnuna says, no, this is shalom kedin. I don't have to care about gazlanim. The halacha is not determined by gazlanim who will steal someone's esrog. So there's no p'tur of maser, says Rav Himnuna. But now that they all hold like Avtulmos, you can't ask a kasha from the Brisa of Reb Shimon ben Yehuda, who argues against the Tanoim. Itmar, Reb Yochanan Reish Lakish, Amri Chavayu, Esrog Bashishish, and Nichnas Shvius. So the Chanota took place on Shishis, but it was only harvested in Shvius, Liolam, Shishis. For every din, it has the status of shishis. It is completely devoid of kedusha shvius, and therefore it's chayav in maser and potem in biur. However, we have a different tradition. Ki otzer Ravin, when Ravin came from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel, Omar, he said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Esrog bashishis shenichnas al shvius. The Chanota was during the 6th year. Is afilu kizayis unases ikikar chayav and alev mishum tevel. So let me just correct something that I said. I said that Ravin is going to offer a different transmission, a different tradition of Rabbi Yochanan. That's not really so. He only actually, I would say, dramatizes or embellishes the first transmission that we had, and everything depends upon Chanota, but he adds one little point there. He says that even if during Shishis it grew beyond just 1 second, beyond Chanota, you follow what I mean? Maybe that's not the right word. It grew beyond Chanota. Maybe it developed beyond Chanota. And it already reached the stage of a kizayis. So the esrog is already pretty mature during shishis. Correct? But it only reached the level of what? Of a kizayis. Then we went into the 7th year. The nases kikikar. Kikar is like a loaf of bread. In other words, most of the volume of this esrog grew during Shvius. So what's the status of the esrog? And as we said, Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish agreed that the esrog depends upon chanota, and the chanota took place in shishis. It even grew partially in shishis. It's therefore chayav and olev mishum teva. There's no p'tur maaser of it. You're chayav in maaser like shishis, because the chanota was in shishis. See, the only thing that bothers me is what would happen according to this tradition of Ravin in the name Rabbi Yochanan, if it only reached Chanota, there was no growth at all. Let me just see if he points anything out here that I missed. Footnote. He summarizes here 4 shitos with regard to the din of esrog as far as shvius and masa. According to Rabbi Gamliel, that was back in the Mishnah on Yudalid, and also according to Av Tulmus, in the name of the 5 Zkenim, that was quoted in the last Brisa. Shvius depends upon Chanota, and Maser depends upon Lakita. We have a machlokas between Rabbah and Rav Hamnuna with regard to an Esrog Shechana B'Shishis, and the Lakita was B'Shvius, so there was Yad Kolam Mashmishim both, so Rabbah insists that he's Potem in Amas. But again, as far as the fundamental principle is concerned, we're accepting Rabbi Gamliel and Av Tulmus that as far as Shvius, as opposed to Maser, Esrog has the status of Chanota. Then we have the Rabbi Seder that took a vote in Usha, and they hold that whether it's Shvius or it's Maser, everything goes Basal Lakita. That's the other extreme, not Chanota but Lakita. We have Rabbi Eliezer, again in the Mishnah back on Yudal, that whether or not Shvius or it's Maser, everything depends upon Chanota. I may have made a mistake when I started the Shia today, and I attributed that to Rabbi Gamliel. I don't remember what I said anymore. But anyway, Rabbi Eliezer is the one who says, Holchim Basar Chanota. And also Rabbi Gamliel says, Holchim Basar Chanota. But as far as Maser is concerned, we go Basar Lakita. Whereas Rabbi Eliezer says we have to be consistent, and Bein L'Shvius and even LaMaser, we go Basar Chanota. Then we had the Brisa of Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda, and he holds that whether or not it's Maser or Bir, everything depends upon Chanota plus Lakita B'chiv. There doesn't seem to be any shita that holds that the status of an esrog is determined by Lakita and only by Lakita. The most extreme shita is the last shita that we mentioned, Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda, but that's because both the Chanota and Lakita took place B'chiv. Okay, I see that David joined us here on Zoom. So David, we are now on Daf Tesvav Hamid Beis, and we're up to Tanur Rabban, which is approximately 12 lines down from the top. See if you can find it. Ilan Shechanti Peirotzav Kodem Chavisha Sabishvat. So now we're holding like Beis Hillel, that Rosh Hashana Lilanos is Tu B'Shvat, and here the Chanota took place before Tu B'Shvat, is Misaser L'Shana Sha'avra, becomes last year's Eros, because Chanota took place before Tu B'Shvat. Achar Chavisha B'Shvat, in event that the Chanota took place after Tu B'Shvat, this Aser L'Shana Haba becomes part of the new year, which was initiated on Tu B'Shvat. And what that would mean is that if we're going into, for example, the 3rd year, then since the Chanota took place in the 3rd year, therefore be chayav in Maser Oni instead of Maser. So again, even though the Lakita, took place after Tu B'Shvat, if the Chanota took place before Tu B'Shvat, it belongs to the previous year. This is a very controversial Rabbi Nechemia here that we're learning. The Elon Sha'ose Shtei Brechos Hashana. It produces twice during the course of a single year. So the Gemara now objects, this is like a side point here, to the word brechos. They brechos al kedai, to the word brechos only refers to birds. And that's based on the Gemara Bava Basra. It says, Kol shnei v'lados hanoladim yachad. So if you have, two newborns, I guess we'll call it vlados, that were born together, that's called a breich. So again, we're talking about an Elon, and the peros did not reach maturation uniformly. For example, the te'ena tree, the fig tree, for one example, will reach Gemar Peri in stages, some earlier and some later. And therefore, Lakita, says Rabbi Nechemia, becomes a very complicated enterprise. If we're going to go bust Lakita, then you're going to have to know which peros grew when. In other words, is it the year of Lakita, or maybe we should assume that that the Chanot took place in the previous year. And if that be the case, then he's being mafresh min hachodesh al hayoshn. We're going to really get messed up here. Because this tree produces twice during the year. So therefore, says Rabbi Nechemia, the Chachamim decided that in this case, we're not going to use Lakita at all, but rather Chanota is going to completely replace the din of these peros as far as Maser. Now, all the peros reach Chanota at the same time. They mature in stages. So therefore, the Chanota, if that's the determining factor, is uniform for all the peros. Aval ilana otse brecha achas. So now we had a problem in the case of Ke'en Shtei Brechos, because we can't go basa Lakita because there's no uniform moment of Lakita, like for example in the fig tree. But what's the real din? Forget about this unusual case of the te'ena tree. What's the normal kovea as far as masus is concerned in a tree that produces once a year? For example, a date tree or an olive tree or a carob tree. All the above produce once annually. And the implication is that now we're going to use the Ikar Adin according to Rabbi Nechemia, which is Lakita. Kigon, to color Uzesin, Ucharuvim, all of these is Osef Brecha Achas, and it's going to be one uniform Lakita, a time for Lakita for all of these. So therefore, there's not going to be any difference as far as Maisa is concerned if we go Basa Lakita, because Lakita is uniform for all of them. Which basically means, in a word, that Lakita is going to determine the year of these peros. And again, we're talking about peros ha'ilon. And we said that peros ha'ilon depend upon chanota. You can also have to figure out, according to this sheet of Nechemia, why should Tu B'Shvat be Rosh Hashana leperes ha'ilon if you're going Basal Lakit? But in any event, the bottom line is that according to the psak here of Rabbi Nechemia, Mis Asrin L'Shana Haba. which means everything depends upon Lakita. It's only that rare exception to the rule, like the Ta'ena tree, where it's not Nilkotin Ki Echad. There, they made a special exception to the rule, and they're going to determine the year of Maser based on Chanot. But that's the exception to the rule is Lakita. And this is, again, very uncomfortable for us. We've been pushing the envelope and the agenda that Paris Eilim depend upon Chanota. And the Chanot is when the rains fall down and the moisture is absorbed underground in the roots of the tree. So now it can produce its fruit. Rabbi Yochanan, which Rishonim say Charuvin here is just one example of all the Paris that we mentioned. Ki Rabbi Nechemia, that everything depends on Lakita. Now, the Gemara assumes if Rabbi Yochanan is recording and transmitting this minhag, then in all likelihood he paskins like Rabbi Nechemia. Esvei Reish Lakish Rabbi Yochanan. I'm going to prove to you from a mission in the 5th parak of Shvius, says Reish Lakish, that everything depends on Chanota and not Lakita. Benos Shuach, he translates it as Te'enim Levanos, white figs. They remain on the tree apparently a very long time, for years. Shviya Shalahem, Shniya. When do we determine in what case, in what mitzias do we say that Benos Shuach have Kedusha Shviyas? It's only Shniya. Shviya Shalem Shniya means the Kedusha Shviyas will only be set when the Lakita took place in the 2nd year of Shemitah, which means, let's say you had 7, 8, 9. So you did the Lakita in year 9, and the Benos Shuach are sanctified with Kedusha Shviyas. Why? If today you're doing Lakita, then I know that the Chanota took place 3 years earlier. And since everything depends upon Chanota, then the Benos Shuach that were harvested in year number 9 are kadosh b'kedusha shviyas. But we see clearly that even with regard to Ta'enim, because Benos Shuach are figs, everything depends on Chanota. That's against Rabbi Yochanan, who said that the minhag was to accept Rabbi Nechemia, and everything depends upon Lakita. With the exception of that, that one fig tree that produces twice annually. Ishtik. And Rabbi Yochanan did not have an answer to this kasha. Again, when an Amor is Ishtik, we don't know what that means. It means he pulls back, he's defeated, he admits defeat, or maybe Ishtik means he didn't even bother answering. It wasn't a kasha. Amalei Rabbi Abba. Rabbi Abba Cohen assumes that Rabbi Yochanan conceded to Reish Lakish that his kasha slugged them up. And he turns to Rabbi Yossi HaKohen. I guess there was a membership club of Kohanim. Anyway, Amai Ishtik, I don't understand why Rabbi Yochanan was silent here. He had a simple answer to deflect Reish Lakish. I was telling you that the minhag of the people was to accept the Shita of Nechemia, and it all depends upon Lakita. With the exception of those kinds of, but in general, it depends on Lakita. Now you're telling me the Rabbanim. You're asking me a kasha from the Mishnah that reflects the Shitas Chachamim who disagree with Rabbi Nechemia. They hold that all Paras holchim achar chanota. But the minhag ha'am is not that way. I was just testifying about the minhag ha'am. So Rabbi Yossi HaKohen says, Mishum di Omar Le, because if Rabbi Yochanan would have responded to Reish Lakish in the way you wanted him to respond to Reish Lakish, then Reish Lakish would say to him, Chavkis Rabbanim v'Avkas Kirab Nechemia, how can you justify a minhag based on the singular view of one single Amora, of one single Tana of Nechemia against all of the Chachamim? You're going to tell me that As Lina Basar Lakita, when all the Tanoim agree that would go Basar Hanata, he says, and Stam Mishnah Kamosa. It's not just a Stam Mishnah. You want to say, well, the Minig was like Rab Nechemia as Lina Basar Lakita. What do you mean? You have a Stam Mishnah that reflects the Shita of the preponderant majority of the Tanoim. And now you're going to paskin Allah like Rav Nechemia? So Rabbi Yochanan couldn't have deflected Reish Lakish by simply saying that you're asking me a kasha from the Rabbanim, because that kasha from the Rabbanim means how can you paskin like Rav Nechemia against the Rabbanim? So Rabbi Abba asked the following kasha: Rabbi Yochanan should have responded to Reish Lakish and say, Kamina Allah, Ka'im Allah Nagu. I'm just testifying what the minig was. The Amali Surah, you're asking me from the Chachamim in the Mishnah, they were talking about Isur, and they say everything is dependent upon Chanata. And if you're not allowed to go Basar Lakita, I agree 100%. The halach is like Chachamim, majority rules, and it's awesome. You have to go Basar Chanata, not Basar Lakita. I was just telling you, I was just offering you the observation that the minig was to take up the Nechemia, that Bazilini Basar Lakita. So Yosef HaKohen responds and he says that Rabbi Yochanan could not have given that answer. The reason why he was shosek is because he had no answer. The Amar Leirich Lakish would have certainly said to him, "B'makom Isura Hinagu Shavkinalu, you should be making a protest. There's Isur here going involved. There's Kedushas Perish Shvius, that's Doraisa. And you're letting the people follow Rab Nechemia? Why don't you make a macha? You should be making a protest. You should be telling them that they're doing it shalom kedir." So the Abba comes back and he asks, Rabbi Yochanan could have given a very straightforward answer to Reish Lakish, Ki aminu l'cha no b'maaseh charuvim. I was only focused on Charuvim and anything that's like Charuvim, which is only Dirabanan. The Ad Amersli Shvius Doraisa, you're talking about the 5 species of grains or olives and grapes, which are Doraisa. So with regard to Charuvim Dirabanan, the Rabbanan weren't so machmir to make a takana that we go Basar Chanata as far as Mas is concerned. Like Paris that a chayv masim in a Torah. So Abba Cohen says that this is the maskana, the bottom line in the kasha of Reish Lakish. El Amar Rabbi Abba Cohen Tmihani Meshiva Reish Lakish L'Tshuva Zu. Meaning, I don't understand why Reish Lakish. Now everything shifts to the other side. They did such a good job to defend Rabbi Yochanan. Now we don't understand why Reish Lakish was making such a tumult about it. To be pasha that he could have answered that question by saying that in Shvius Doraisa we go Basar Chanata. But when we're dealing with Charuvin and other peros, which are fruit trees, other than Zeisim V'Anov, which are only D'Rabbanan, when the Meiser itself is D'Rabbanan, then the minig of the Am is to go Basar Lakita like Reb Nechemia. That seems like a simple answer to Reish Lakish's objection. So the Gemara says, I don't understand the language of Rabbi Abba over here. He says, Im Heshiva. If Reish Lakish would have, Im Heshiva sounds like a Lashon of Suffolk. Osvam. What do you mean, Im Heshiva? If he would have objected, Reish Lakish, and asked the kasha of Yochanan. In fact, he did object. He asked the kasha, what's this? Ela Ema Im Kivla. This is how we're rewriting Rabbi Abba Cohen. I'm amazed in Kibla Rabbi Yochanan im lo Kibla. He explains it here very nicely in the Masechet. I'll read it to you, and that'll be the idea for today. He says, Tamani im Rabbi Yochanan shasak, kevan shel yadam al hashim. In other words, did he accept the proof of Reish Lakish from Benos Shuach? and he actually removed his haskama to the minhag that reflected Rabbi Nechemia, that is lina basel l'kita. Oh, well, perhaps, what I don't know, maybe Rabbi Yochanan never accepted the raya because he insisted on his original position. And when we differentiate between Maisa Doraisa in, let's say, Zeisim Anovim and Maisa Darabon and Charuvin and the like. And Rabbi Yochanan really gave his Geshpanka, he gave his okay to accept the minhag like Rabbi Nechemia that has linin basel l'kita in those payrolls whose Maisa is only the Rabbanim. And why was he shosei? He didn't even bother answering the kasha. Since Maisa Charuvin is only the Rabbanim, it's not similar to Shvius, which is Dorais, and therefore we don't have to be mach. That accepts the minhag of Rabbi Nechemia, so that we don't do. And this leads us to the Mishnah on Daf Tezayin. B'Tz Hashem, B'li Neder, we'll pick up tomorrow on Yom Shini. Good day.